All right, you ready?
Yes.
It's recording.
Thanks to my father, David Glenn and Vactor, born in August, Indiana, in Plymouth, I think it was Marshall County, Indiana, near South Bend, 35 miles east of Chicago, near the Tippecanoe River. My father, being a very generous man in general, and in my case, especially generous, I was given a collection after Christmas, and I think it was 1953 when I was going to Lawrenceville, and after Christmas before I left to go back to school, during after Christmas vacation, I was given, among other things, I had mentioned the Browning shotguns, but this year I was also given a whole collection of long-playing records, like, from different companies, Decca, let's see, RCA, of classical music, but of the modern period. There was a record store that sold long-playing records down west of our house on Kingston Pike, down Kingston Pike in Kingston Plaza and shopping center. There was I think an A&P there, a supermarket, and this record store. We went down together and Daddy picked them out for me. There were about 50 records that I took back to Lawrenceville in a little cardboard box to protect them, keep them from bending or getting hurt in any way, and took them back on the train with me with my baggage, and in this collection there were wonderful recordings of Beethoven symphonies, Vivaldi violin concertos, Bach's preludes and fugues, and Guru Leader by Arnold Schoenberg, a neo-romantic 12-tone piece that he had written for large orchestra and chorus. There were, I think, about 160 players and singers in the performance my father had heard of Guru Leader in Vienna in 1928. And with the Vienna Philharmonic, I don't know what chorus, but I had a recording of Guru Leader and also a recording of another 12-tone piece by Alban Berg, the lyrics written for string quartet. And I may have had a couple of Schoenberg's string quartets, the second, possibly the third, which is much more dissonant. And then Tchaikovsky symphonies, probably fourth, fifth, and sixth, and then some piano concertos, maybe Liszt, possibly Beethoven, 5 concertos. It was a great collection for a young music lover, as I was, and became more and more. Anyway, I had all this especially generous gift of my father, well chosen, to educate me in the best performances. I mean, there were performances of Otto Klemperer, of Eugene Ormandy, violin concertos with Heifetz, Yehudi Menuhin, piano concertos with Rubinstein playing, and let me just see who else. Beethoven symphonies conducted by Otto Klemperer, and the Beethoven Violin Concerto was made. I don't know if that was conducted by Klemperer. I know all the Brahms symphonies, and then Tchaikovsky symphonies 4, 5, and 6. Vivaldi Violin Concertos, beautiful, beautiful. What extraordinary sound quality they had, and some impressionist French music, such as Debussy's the Preludes and Afternoon of a Faun, L'après-midi d'une Faune, and then maybe some Ravel, the Ravel ballet music for I don't think his, however, I don't think his piano concertos were included in that. There may have been the piano concerto for one hand written for Paul Wittgenstein, who'd lost an arm in the First World War. One was written by Ravel, and the other was written by Richard Strauss. My father had known his brother Ludwig in Vienna, where his flute teacher Niedermeyer brought him in to do a musicale at Wittgenstein's sister's house, which he had built as an architect and supervised the building as one of the greatest houses of that period, built in Vienna. There was a time when Loos, Loos, was doing a lot of wonderful modern houses, and some of these architects would do every piece of furniture in these modern houses. Fabulous. Wittgenstein's accomplishment was extraordinary. He was a philosopher at that time, had been teaching at Cambridge, come back to Vienna to live in the hunting cottage of his sister, and then at any rate, I listened to these composers, Alban Berg and Arnold Schoenberg, who were writing their pieces using tone rows, which means 12 note tune or theme for their pieces. I mean, both the lyric suite, of Alban Berg for string quartet, but also his beautiful, beautiful concerto for violin, which he wrote in memory of his daughter who died. One of the great violin concertos, and the lyric suite was a beautiful, beautiful piece. That was also arranged for full orchestra, almost as like a little symphony. I have a recording of that too. I mean, a CD of that. And anyway, I got to all this music on long playing records, which I was very careful about. I had these special devices for cleaning the record after I listened to them. I kept them in plastic covers and spray this stuff on to wipe them down around the whole circumference of the disc, and then keep the record jackets in plastic little covers, little jackets, so that the dust wouldn't get in or get into the grooves. These records kept me company. Later, I had the complete piano sonatas of Schubert, which I bought from one of the teachers at Lawrenceville, Frank Ruda, who lived across the way from me, from Raymond House. In Dawes House, he sold me the complete Schubert piano sonatas. And then I had the major Mozart symphonies, all the Beethoven symphonies and Brahms symphonies, the Tchaikovsky symphonies, the great Tchaikovsky concertos for violin, and some of the piano concertos. And I had all the 5 Beethoven piano concertos. I don't know who was playing, but Eugene Ormandy was conducting most of the recordings issued and made by the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he was a great conductor. It was a great orchestra with him conducting. Klepper may have been playing the Berlin Philharmonic, or when Karajan playing, conducting the Vienna Philharmonic. There was some of the Wagner preludes. There was a favorite piece of my father's when my father had been hired to play second flute, the second flute chair, when his teacher Arthur Kitty, who was born I think in Finland, retired from his second chair in the Chicago Orchestra and went up to the upper Michigan Peninsula to retire there to meditate, do kind of Eastern Hindu yogic meditation and maybe even Hatha yoga, the sitting positions of yoga. He had recommended my father to take his place in the orchestra. So this is after my father, who had put himself through Northwestern, driving a bakery truck, getting up at 4 in the morning, and delivering cakes and other baked goods all over Evanston. You know, before people sat down to breakfast, they'd have fresh baked goods delivered by Dave Van Vactor. And then he'd come back, maybe go back to bed and try to get a couple of more hours sleep, run over to Northwestern so he wouldn't be late to class. He was a pre-med student. He was taking trigonometry and all the pure sciences, biology and chemistry, mathematics, physics, and he was taking both both German and Spanish. He was president of the Spanish club, doing some sports, and he was also in a fraternity called the Go-Getters, and he's a very busy young man, and also played in the Northwestern football marching band. One time when he got a little bit drunk after going out with his buddies, or maybe at the fraternity house, he was marching in the band and down the field, and then when the band, the majorette, who was leading the band, stopped, their job of marching job was over. My father just continued holding his flute and marched between the goalposts absent-mindedly. Probably everybody up in the bleachers had a good laugh. Anyway, he had a very good career at Northwestern. Was the best student at the School of Music, and he completed his pre-medical work with good grades, high grades, to get into any medical school he was interested in. Northwestern had a medical school downtown, but he didn't have the money to pay for tuition, so he had to get a job in the public schools, and he got a job at Evanston High School after he got back from Vienna. And the Evanston High School student orchestra was excellent. All this was the consequence of Osborne McConaughey Sr., who taught at Northwestern in musical education and written about 50 books on the subject. He was the father of Oz McConaughey, who was my father's best friend and his best man when my mother and he were married. And Oz had known her since she was 12 years old. Met her at some musical event in Evanston and introduced my parents. My father came back to Evanston with no money and only had enough from his Evanston High School job to get by. He was playing in the Chicago Civic Orchestra, conducted by Eric Delamarter. Eric Delamarter was actually a rabid anti-Semite. I'd read some others who wrote my father's talking about the Hebrews. I mean, really a rabid hater of Jewish people. And made my father over aware of the competition with Jewish musicians that he faced in his career, which mainly, he saw people like Leonard Bernstein getting all the best posts. He actually competed with Bernstein for a position with the New York Philharmonic after his first symphony was played by. He conducted it with the New York Philharmonic, the first premiere, and he had gone to New York to see Judson, the big artist manager, to see if he could get a position in the orchestra. And then he was told that it had been given, assistant conductor had been given to Leonard Bernstein because of the Jewish members of the orchestra board of the Philharmonic. And that rankled in my father's memory for the rest of his life. I think that would have been the best opportunity, and he would have had a career as a conductor like nobody's business, because he was all prepared. He'd been studying with Frederick Stock on a music scholarship with the orchestra. I think it was something like $4,000. When Stock died, after all the years that he had taught my father how to conduct, supervised his learning of scores, and become like a father figure to him, a mentor really, but more than that, it showed him his music. He's actually not a bad composer himself. Frederick Stock came from Germany, and then his family had a country place up on Lake Michigan in a place called Fish Creek. My father would be invited up there, and one time they had a big bunch of people at their summer place, and my father was sent out to go fishing for trout for dinner. And he caught a whole mess of trout, and they were cooked up as a magnificent feast of the fish caught by my father. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today in this addendum to High Hurdler and Fontana Lake, my earlier pieces, which you might have heard by now, or looked at, is the whole role of Schoenberg and 12-tone technique in my father's musical writing, and also in my life. Thanks to him, I mean, I was curious about 12-tone technique and asked my father, and he actually had Schoenberg's book um, uh, called The Row, which was the 12-note um, as the chromatic scale is a series of 12 notes. Tunes or themes were made up out of these notes. Often the intervals, minor intervals, like a minor fifth or a minor seventh, or maybe an augmented sixth, sixth sharp, and all half steps, producing, in some cases, dissonance, in other cases, marvelous sound. Anyway, by listening to Guru Leader and the lyric suite, I got to know, I got to love listening to 12-tone music as a 13-year-old because of this wonderful collection of records, LPs that my father had put together for me and I'd taken to law school. It really kept me company because there was many empty, lonely, boring times, and I could put on music on my little record player and listen to the great pieces like the great repertoire, the best Mozart symphonies, the Prague, the Jupiter, the Hafner, and some of the great concertos of Beethoven and Mozart and sonatas and Bach's marvelous preludes and fugues and some of the choral music, maybe the St. Matthew's Passion, the Mass in B minor. I just got my whole musical education listening to these records, and also his concert and one of my best friends as a boy, William Starr, who was Daddy's concertmaster in the Knoxville Symphony. I had written and put together a wonderful long-playing record analyzing a couple of Mozart symphonies and explaining sonata form for symphonies that Mozart had used. So that was a great education. And all these other pieces, and then talking to my father about 12-tone theory. In fact, I mean, he just would open the Schoenberg book and translate it from German for me. And what he did is the first piece he wrote was called Fantasia, Chaconne, and Allegro. Now, Chaconne is a theme and variations, like a Passacaglia, but different. It has different rules, and he'd also, as I think I said earlier in this biography of my father, either High Hurdler or Fontana Lake at some point that he had very early written a chaconne that at 29 years old, before he was finished as a music student at the school, Northwestern School of Music, and when Dean Lutkin brought him in and said, "Man, actually, you're the best student we've ever had." You know, Hansen had been the best alumnus of the School of Music, but now my father was. He said, "You can't go to medical school because of your parents' finances, I understand. You must go to Vienna and study with one of the great masters, because the greatest musicians in Europe are there, Schoenberg, and others. Richard Strauss. I mean, he's no longer teaching, but maybe you can study with a great teacher. And he did study with Franz Schmidt, who wrote 4 symphonies. He was a wonderful harmonist and great composer, in my view. A favorite of mine. I know his work very well. My father studied composition with him. He studied flute with Niedermeyer, who was first flute in the Vienna Philharmonic. And Niedermeyer had taken him to Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein's, the great philosopher's, sister's house. Wittgenstein was home from staying at his sister's in the hunting cottage on the estate, her estate. And my father was brought to the house to play a musicale with his flute teacher. And at that time, Ludwig Wittgenstein walked in, dressed in a simple Oxford, probably broadcloth shirt, button-down shirt, and a tweed jacket, in a kind of casual way. Maybe others there were dressed in formal attire. My father played in the what was selected by his teacher to play for those present. And later on that evening, after meeting the great philosopher who took a shine to him, of course, it's probably everybody knows he was gay and interested in men. My father was blonde, handsome, wonderful, athletic build. I always call him the blonde beast, strong, blue-eyed, blonde hair, perfect Aryan, Hitler style. Anyway, in walks Maurice Ravel, whose hand he got to shake. What a great thrill that must have been for my dad. And then he later was invited by the philosopher to come over and meet him and have tea with him, and they talked, of course, about music and about conducting, which my father was interested in. He hadn't started to play in the Chicago Orchestra yet. The job was given to him when his Arthur Kitty retired to Upper Michigan to do his meditation, Hindu meditation, and he was recommended. Arthur Kitty talked to Frederick Stark, and the person he recommended was my father to take over second flute, which my father, the job during the Depression, $90 a week was a terrific amount of pay. Nobody else was getting that. I mean, even in the labor movement. It's a great job. The condition for the position was that he must go to France and study with Marcel Maurice, who was the greatest flutist in France at that time, and probably in Europe. And I think probably a better teacher and flutist in general than his teacher Niedermeyer. So I mean, that was the finesse that he needed in his education as a flutist. And he went to Paris after he and my mother were married. They had already eloped, but they had a full marriage in the garden of my grandparents' house at 2703 Sheridan Road. And Ozma Conaty was there, of course. And the whole thing was filmed on one of these old Kodak 16 millimeter silent cameras, motion picture camera, with Kodak film. And I don't know how many reels there were, but I saw a lot of that footage because Blaine Sprout used it in the video he made of my father's first performance of his symphony, which was played on NPR all over the country. And unfortunately, Sprout never returned that footage, valuable footage. After my parents were married, they took the train up to Montreal and got the boat train to board the Normandy, which they crossed the Atlantic on, and then probably the boat train in from Cherbourg to Paris. They stayed at the Regina Hotel in Paris. My father did not speak French. My mother spoke French, good grammar. She wasn't really fluent, though she worked on it all her life. I mean, even in her 50s. She was in a French group in Knoxville with Fanny Emerson and some other people who had a little French club, so they spoke French. And Fanny Emerson's husband, Howard Emerson, was related to descendant of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He taught economics at University of Tennessee. And let me go back to my father's first use of 12-tone technique. It was a commission he received from Robert Whitney, the conductor of the Louisville Symphony. It was supposed to be no longer than 40 minutes, and for full orchestra. And my father got this commission, I think 1957. We just come back from Frankfurt. He had to have it done by something like, in a rather short time. It was written in about, in about 40 days, I think. And all the parts were copied by George Devine, his copyist, who later became, though he had only graduated from high school in Chicago, became a full professor of musicology and very, very respected at the University of Tennessee, though he only had a high school degree. He was a wonderful man and one of the sweetest people I've ever known. He and his wife June always taking care of me when my father and parents were in South America. They lived out at Farragut on the Tennessee River, Farragut, Tennessee, and in Admiral Farragut's birthplace house, right on the banks of the Tennessee, beautiful view. And George and June played bassoon and the Knoxville Orchestra. And George was Daddy's copyist, who had followed him to Knoxville from Chicago with his wife June, they'd tried to have children, but she had miscarried, and it was a kind of sadness for them. But they remained married a long time. June had a lot of problems with her back and had operations that did not solve the problem. She was a great person, sort of slightly masculine, good, loved fishing and doing sort of masculine things, and was a redhead and a great friend of mine. I mean, June Devine was a great friend, always a loving person in my case, and George too. I mean, I used to remember as a little boy, he was copying music for my father when my father was copying, doing the orchestral score, had done the orchestral score to several pieces. His First Symphony in D, which won the New York Philharmonic Prize, performed in January of 1939, about 6 weeks after I was born, November 17th, 38. George would be copying another commissioned work Fabian Savitsky for Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra of his credo, great choral work called Credo, with a text by Bruce Tarkington. Wonderful stuff, and also his music for Marines, commissioned by the U.S. Marine Corps, right about 1944. Forget the exact date of the music for the Marines, but it was later called his Second Symphony. And so that's how his one of his symphonies became his Third Symphony, and then his Fourth Symphony was based on the text I put together from Walden. That was his Fourth Symphony, and then the Fifth Symphony was commissioned for the 1976 celebration of the Declaration of Independence in the Revolutionary War, and was dedicated to, by, in quotes, my revolutionary ancestors. And it was a piece that the one that was a film was made of, shown all over the country on NPR, WGBH in Boston and other stations, and California, all over the place. And wonderful video. And that was just about the time that WGBH in Boston, Trump Music, Robert J. Lursema did all his works on his 82nd birthday. Spent the whole morning playing Van Vactor music, having done that for about 3 weeks before, and then had a long interview with him, and it was a great moment for my father. Lursema loved his music, and actually a lot of people in Boston had learned to love it because they heard it almost every day for quite a few weeks. And these are the recordings of Orion Records that Gideon Hornfield had put out, and after he formed Orion Records, and he brought out one nice record on Everest of some of Daddy's best pieces, such as the Overture to a Comedy and several other pieces. And then 10 records on Orion label with covers by our friend Byron McKeeby, with wonderful sort of surrealistic pop art covers, really great covers, and the viola concerto, a lot of the band symphonies, band music, and finally the 36 pieces for woodwinds, as a two-disc album. I'm going to go back to 12-tone music. I mean, after my father, brought out the harmony Lehrer of Schoenberg and explained 12-tone theory to me, and I had asked him, I wanted to understand what it was all about. He explained it, and then on the piano, sat down on the piano and maybe played a tone row tune, maybe the one he was using in the piece he was writing for the Louisville Orchestra, Fantasia, Chaconne, and Allegro. I started to talk about the fact that at 29 years old, he had written a Chaconne, as well as a lot of wonderful songs. When he was a composition student, he was studying with, I think he studied harmony with Carl Beecher and he was also studying some composition with a young composer named Mark Wessel, who later went to Vienna with, and who was sort of after him in a kind of homosexual way and bothered my father. And finally, my father went to see Alfred Adler, a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst who was rather famous, who had the theory about the inferiority complex. And his advice to my father was, well, why don't you just leave Vienna? I mean, you've been here 9 months. Why don't you just go back to the U.S. and get away out from under this man's oppressive behavior, which my father did. And at any rate, I started to say that my father had written the Chaconne at 29. It was performed with the Eastman Rochester Orchestra, conducted by Howard Hanson. I think who was dean of the Eastman School of Music at the time. It was a great feather in my father's cap. And I've never heard that work, unfortunately. It should be dug up and performed or recorded. My father never recorded it. I mean, he recorded a lot of pieces from that time, but not that one. And also he has a big piece of big Passacaglia, and also a big piece for something like 5 small pieces for a larger orchestra, and a piece for dance, and sort of a dance suite. And then he has another tone poem called Christopher Columbus, which I've never heard. I've never really heard the credo, which is a wonderful harmony, like in the style of the ode from the Marine Music for Marines, which we are now calling his second symphony. It's the Ode for the Dead. I mean, it's a piece I heard on 78s as a 4-year-old, and I just absolutely loved. I mean, it's a very wonderful harmonies and powerful piece with great horn parts. This is my growing up in the house of a composer and musician who practices his instrument, his flute, 4 hours a day, every day, without fail, using the etudes written by Marcel Maurice. He had learned when he and my mother got to Paris. His first trip after, I think he mistakenly left his flute in a restaurant and had to go to the lost and found to the Paris police, and they found it. And also he had gone out to eat and spilled probably garlic butter from escargot all over a gabardine suit, and did things like that. Anyways, he didn't speak French. He had to go out on the bus to Meudon, where Maurice lived, and then to start his studies, flute studies with Marcel Maurice. And Maurice played without vibrato. When I studied horn, the Russians were using vibrato in their horn style of playing French horn. In fact, Osmer McConaughey brought back a wonderful concerto by Glier for horn, played in this style with vibrato, an LP, when the Boston Symphony went to Russia. And I had a copy of that. And I played with no vibrato. And anyway, so my father was going out to Meudon on the bus. My mother would see him off, and this is a country boy from Indiana, don't forget, set loose in Paris, just to get, not knowing the language, and just having to reconnoiter and get where he was going. And it was a little bit, of a culture shock for him, I think. But Maurice and his family spent their summer vacations, their August vacation, in Saint-Amour in Burgundy. So my parents had to go out there to continue the lessons and this wonderful coaching and education and all the art of playing a great flute. I mean, my father was one of the best flutists in America. I mean, he started he got the scores to all the Bach flute music. In fact, he started the Aspen Festival with Emmanuel Williams playing harpsichord, doing all Bach, and one of the great flute players in America. I mean, Kincaid was the first flute in New York, and then I mean his colleague Ernst Legel from Germany was first flute in the Chicago Orchestra, my father's second flute, and I think and at another point had said that when Dorio Anthony Dwyer at 10 years old came to him to learn flute, he gave her to Ernie Legel, who became her teacher. He thought Legel was a better flutist than he was, and so she got the best. She became one of the great first women to hold principal flutist, first chair in a major symphony orchestra in the Boston Symphony for years and years. And I knew her. She was a great friend of my parents. She she once let me stay in her summer place in Tanglewood on the lake. And I brought my son Davy out there when he was just a boy, and we went fishing, and he fell in the lake, and I had to reach down and grab his ankle and pull him out. And so we were out there in Lenox at Dorio's house, and let me just continue. The kind of wonderful thing in learning about 12-tone theory and having my father peck out the theme of the tone row he used for Fantasia Chaconne Allegro. That's not a very good, it doesn't really do justice to the tune, to the row, but it's 12 notes, and the rule that Schoenberg set people who were interested in learning his way of using the row in pieces of music was that you were not supposed to repeat the row until you had used all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. And this was written out. In fact, I have one in my pocket that my father always had on about an 8x10 piece of thick cardboard he'd had to cut, which he wrote his music on. Or he had this piece of music paper, which I will show to you. And somewhere here. Okay, here it is. Now this is on note paper. It's the first version of the row of 12 notes is written out, and then that row gets another version by inverting it, turning the tune upside down, and then the retrograde, the backwards version of the tune, and then you get retrograde inversion. So there are about 48 versions of the row, including the one on the first version, which is the chromatic scale. So there's he'd have this on his piece of thick cardboard. He'd have cut for himself, on his stand-up desk, and so that this was the master plan for the piece. The theme that he used of 12 notes, the row, and then all of its versions, inversion, retrograde, and retrograde inversion. And this is how it looked. So that was my introduction to 12-tone music. I mean, I listened to so much of these records to such an extent at the age of 12 years old that I really began to love slightly dissonant music. Always rich and extraordinary harmonies. My father's way of writing it was to use tone centers, so that it was really more tonal than atonal, and not terribly dissonant. This is a romantic, neo-romantic version. I mean, he was sometimes called a neoclassicist, and then by others a neo-romantic. His atonal, his 12-tone music, he used this master plan with the 48 versions of the row in every piece. I mean, he used it in his Fifth Symphony, he used it in his Sixth Symphony, and I think in his Seventh Symphony, and in the Fourth Symphony, the Walden, based on the text I put together for him from Henry David Thoreau's Walden. Always had this. He always used a row, and he had this master plan, the 48 versions, always in front of him, so he could control the material harmonically. And he always wrote, never went to the piano. He didn't need to go to the piano. I mean, don't forget, he had, to be a conductor, I think I said earlier in this biography, in one of the sections, either High Hurdler or Fontana Lake, that he had relative pitch. He didn't have perfect pitch, but he along with his photographic memory, so that he conducted always from memory, all the major repertoire, and he a very good rhythm. He didn't need to go to the piano. I mean, he could hear everything in his head and write it. And to be a conductor, symphony conductor, as I said earlier in this piece on his life and his musical career, I said that you had to be able to transpose simultaneously from every key of all the instruments in the orchestra, the 90 or so instruments in the orchestra, instantaneously, to read an orchestral score. You had to be able to do that. I mean, it's an extraordinary skill. And, it's just a question of doing it over and over. I mean, practicing your instrument and many, many hours of playing different, going to rehearsals and doing hundreds of different pieces, learning different pieces. And if you're have a soloist, if you have an instrument like flute or violin or trumpet, oboe, bassoon, I mean, your instrument, if you might be playing recitals. You might be in ensemble groups, string quartets, or trios, or other combinations. Woodwind quintets. My father toured with, did 46 concerts sponsored by Nelson Rockefeller all over South America. Every country, including some of the islands like Trinidad, where after the concert the whole audience followed them down to their place they were staying overnight. The woodwind quintet, and beating a drum and everything. They were so enthusiastic. He went to Brazil. He conducted in Brazil his theme and variations, solemn variations, variazioni solenne. He got 14 curtain calls and great critical articles, great notices in the newspapers, and then in Santiago, Chile, in Buenos Aires, and then he was brought back to Chile about 6 times. Once in this had been the Woodwind Quintet tour had been in 44, and then in 45 we were down there as a family with my sister Adrian, later called Raven, and when he was 60, about 10 years later, he went down with my mother for 6 months. As a family, we were in Santiago for 6 months. I was 7, spoke perfect Spanish. Unfortunately, not used and later forgotten, but I'm getting back to that. Anyway, when he was sent by the State Department, he was 60 years old. He conducted 10 concerts and gave 10 flute recitals with a harpsichordist by the name of Federico Heinlein, all over from the farthest northern Chilean town, La Serena, Concepcion, and Puerto Montt at the down near the Patagonia, down near the tip of Chile, from the far north of Chile, this long country, this like a long sliver down the coast of the west coast of Chile. He gave 10 symphony concerts and 10 flute recitals of Baroque music with Federico Heinlein, and came back quite a sick man, having gotten this awful paramecium, lost a lot of weight, and had sciatica. He had to get the bishop of one of the Catholic bishops, through a friend of his who was related to him, to do a special service praying for his recovery and for his good health. A novena, it's called. And this was the brother of Alfonso Letelier, who was bishop of Catholic Archbishop of Chile. And he came back to Knoxville still a bit sick, on the sick side. Looking like an old man. He'd been away just a year for the State Department sponsored trip, and I wrote that up for them at his direction, and it was quite a successful trip. They had a lot of friends down there. Domingo Santa Cruz, his daughter, his lover, Filomena Orrego Salas, Teresa Orrego Salas, Filomena's daughter, was the best friend of Felicia Montenegro, who was Leonard Bernstein's wife and mother of his children. Nina and the boys, and his South American experience is very, very powerful for our whole family. For me, very much a great experience living down there as a child, going to school and in one of their schools, not in an English-speaking school, but learning Spanish, and then having playmates in the neighborhood. We lived on a street called Enrique Narciso. I think that's some historical figure. I wrote a poem about that street, or a prose poem, and he had a big influence on some of the younger composers. I mean, there's a very fine 12-tone composer named Ginastera who wrote a wonderful, wonderful piece based on the 150th Psalm of King David, a choral piece, rousing piece, wonderful piece. I mean, he had a wonderful friend, Rene Amengual, who was a pianist. And of course, all the composers down there, Juan Arrego Salas, Alfonso Letelier, and others. He had a big influence on some of the younger composers. There was a 12-tone composer who ended up in Berlin. He was a good friend of Claudio Arrau's, who was sent by the Chilean government 10 years old to Berlin to study piano. Of course, he became one of the great pianists in the world. And he performed in Knoxville with my father conducting. And I remember one time he was doing all the Beethoven sonatas for piano at Town Hall. We went there. We were supposed to go out to dinner with him afterwards. He wouldn't go out because he'd made one mistake. These are stories, musical life stories. Anyway, that's all I have to say for now. And thank you very much. That's it. I think I've got it. A lot of stuff. It turned out well. Thank you. I think it's quite interesting and not as boring as I want. There's a picture of him right here. I'm not sure of the